So, good morning and welcome along to today's Dairy Tech webinar. I should actually say good morning, good evening and good afternoon, because I know we've got a truly international audience today. Today's webinar is entitled Worldwide Grazing Perspectives and Embracing Technology. We've got a truly international lineup of speakers for you this morning. But before I introduce them, just a little bit of housekeeping for delegates. Please leave your camera off and your microphone muted during the session. If you want to hide all the black screens of all the delegates that are on there, go to speaker view so you can just see who's speaking. Instructions for this should have been in the joining instructions. If you want to ask a question, we're going to do a question and answer session at the end, so use the chat function and the questions will come through to me. And also, if you're really enjoying it and you want to tweet about this, hashtag DairyTech21. Just get the message out there. So maybe we'll have some more joining as we go along. Just a brief outline of the program. We've got Andrew Hoddard joining us from New Zealand, followed by Nigel Locke from dairy farming in South Africa. And then a presentation from our sponsors. Our generous sponsors today are Germinal, so we've got a presentation at the end from them. We expect the session to last around about an hour and a half, so finishing up about midday. So firstly, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker. Andrew Hoddard is dairy farming, as I said, in New Zealand, so fielding in the North Island of New Zealand, so north of Palmerston North, so south of the North Island, I suppose. Andrew's also national president of the Federated Farmers in New Zealand. Andrew's going to talk to us around making the most of homegrown forage on his own farm there. I suppose what I'd like to know really is how you cope with a minimum or an average temperature in the winter of 12 degrees and an average summer temperature of 25 degrees, Andrew. We woke up to -6 up in Cumbria in the north of England this morning. So I guess you're towards the end of your summer, and I looked at your forecast before. It looked like you had about 27 degrees yesterday, so quite a change. But you're very welcome. We appreciate that it's approaching what is it, 11:30 in New Zealand, so approaching midnight. We're probably going to finish about 1 o'clock in the morning. We really appreciate you joining us this evening out there in New Zealand. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Andrew.
Thanks, Robert. Getting a bit late at night, so if I fall asleep, someone shout out and wake me up. And I do have to milk in the morning as well, joys. Just on the temperature, I have worked straight after university. I spent a year in Canada, so I do know what cold is. I have experienced the extremes of sort of Northern Hemisphere dairy farming. I much do prefer New Zealand, to be honest. We're probably actually at the moment just getting into our February is generally our kind of hottest month and driest month. Is my screen sharing all correctly? Yep, cool. Yes, so look, I've been asked to obviously talk about my own farm, grazing on the farm and technology, but also just to cover off what is Federated Farmers and a little bit on New Zealand and how we sort of got through the subsidy period. So I'll just start off with Federated Farmers. Basically, I imagine most of you are all from the UK, so pretty much we are an identical sort of replica to the NFU. Very similar. We cover dairy, beef, sheep, and sort of arable farming, and we don't sort of anything the AHDB does in the UK. We don't do that sort of stuff. We've got the equivalent in New Zealand, Dairy NZ, Foundation for Arable Research, or Beef and Lamb New Zealand, who sort of cover that research and extension. So we are pretty much a advocacy organisation. We're there to represent farmers and political decision making, but also where we see challenges for farmers and solutions where we can offer up some solutions. That's also some of the stuff we do. So things like what we call the Queen Elizabeth II Trust in New Zealand. It's it was started back in the late 70s by a board member of Federated Farmers, where farmers with blocks of native land on their farm that's covenanted, and basically not allowed to be cleared or changed. You put it into trust to preserve it. So that's just one example of not pure lobbying, but just someone through Federated Farmers seeing a need, a passion, and making that happen. Just to briefly touch on the subsidy sort of side, it's a common question. I've had other speaking slots over COVID with the UK, where that's been a topic of discussion, how we got through that period of time. I was 9 when it happened, so I can't provide too much sort of insight from a farming perspective at the time, more of a primary school perspective. But from from what I saw from my parents, and obviously seen afterwards, basically it was in the dairy sector. The subsidies really never applied. They were mainly towards sheep farming here in New Zealand. And I mean, the way we adapted to that removal of subsidies was very simply, you just learned how to be more efficient. You worked out, your farm was a business, and you just worked in that manner. If it couldn't afford to be done, it wasn't done. And you just looked at, the basics of supply, demand, making sure things worked, and looked at how you can do things better. And it just forced everyone to how you can do things better, how you can be more efficient. And obviously, our strength here in New Zealand is grazing. It is pasture-based systems. And so it was, how do we use those systems better? How do we get the maximum from them? How do we make the best changes? Look, I'll move into now. Did that move? Next slide. It doesn't seem to be happening on my keyboard. There we go. So my farm, so we've got 300 hectares total here, and 220 is the milking platform. Now there's probably another 60 hectares that is used to support young stock, silage, grow crops on, predominantly maize. We do about 20 hectares of maize here a year. And the rest of it is native bush or tracks and buildings. And then we've got a little 20 hectare runoff about 10 kilometres away, where our calves go from sort of weaning through to just before breeding. And 220 hectares, that's basically at the limit from the cow shed. That's what I can access, where it's, I could obviously milk on a little bit more, but it's just, that's going to be walking them too far to get into the shed. So that sort of sets our limit in terms of our milking area. The cows, predominantly Holstein Friesian. If you would have seen in the previous slide, you would have spotted a belted Galloway there. There are a couple of interesting crosses in the herd who have been kept. I have 2 daughters, so I run the risk of anything that looks too cute gets kept. And unfortunately, there's 3 belted Galloways have managed to make it into the herd, along with 5 speckled Parks and 1 white Galloway. Their production is pretty poor, but I am under orders that they must be kept. And so, but I have a deal. They're only allowed 10 of their cute little beefies in the herd at any one time. So yeah, they don't affect production too much. One thing we do here is split. We haven't always done split calving, and I guess also I should say I've been on this farm since 1998. I moved. It wasn't originally our original family farm. Originally, our family was a bit closer to Wellington. For those familiar with Wellington, There is what you call the Hutt Valley that is just to the north of Wellington, and our family used to farm just at the top end of that, but that's now sort of been gobbled up by urban sprawl, and so we left there in about 1998 and bought this property up in just north of Fielding. And originally I share milked we only had one side of the road, and I originally started share milking, and over the years we've bought the other side of the road, so we went from 180 hectares to 300 hectares, and then sort of bought into owning the land. So at the moment, myself and my brother are the only owners of the, some of my wife as well with me, own the company which owns one side of the road and leases the other side of the road off my parents. My brother's only got a very small shareholding, and he's told me I've got about 5 years to buy him out, and then that point it's just me and my wife, and then eventually it'll be buying off the last of the land off my parents at some point. Originally when we moved here, we were always spring calving, but over time, in the last 5 years, moved to split calving, simply as noticed that the fact that in February, like our grass growth right now is less than what it is in the middle of winter. And in fact, some Junes I was getting much better growth than February, March, April. And it just, kind of made sense that actually some of our toughest times of the year of grazing is actually February, March. So it just did make sense if we could drop those numbers in February and March and milk a small amount of cows through the winter. It was actually going to fit our pasture curve a lot better. So we carve about 100 cows in the autumn, and so it's about 460 we carve in the spring. Production wise, it's probably nothing exciting for over in the northern hemisphere, but on terms of pasture base, we're kind of I think it's about average, or per cow it's slightly higher, per hectare about average for New Zealand. And in terms of that pasture harvest, I estimate we probably grow around 12 tonne of feed per hectare per year, and harvest somewhere around 9 tonne of that. And obviously, you mentioned before the maize we grow, that's sort of used as good autumn feed, but also into the winter and spring, just to balance out the pasture a bit. Can be, in the spring especially, pasture can be real rocket fuel, and so having some maize silage sort of helps balance that out, and keep some condition on the cows, so they don't just put it all into milk and just strip that, can keep that condition on them. Next slide, please. Or is that me control? Yeah, okay. So pasture management, as I assume this saying gets used in the UK as well, but you can't manage what you don't measure. And so over the years, my measuring has sort of moved with technology. So from word go, back in 97 or 98 when I first started share milking, had a plate meter, and so it was always that once a week walking around doing the pasture measure. When we moved up to this farm here in 98, obviously bigger farm than, our old family farm was only sort of 60 hectares effective, so it wasn't too much of a big challenge walking around it, plating it. When we sort of moved up to 100 and 80 hectares, and then 300 hectares. That became quite a challenging walk. It kind of took up nearly 2 days if I wanted to walk the whole farm, which didn't leave a lot else to happen for the rest of the week. And like, I think it was in 2008, my last year entering the Share Milker of the Year contest, I got second place, and part of second prize, that was for the region, was a gift voucher with one of the firms that was developing the toe behind pasture meter. So I converted all of that prize into a toe behind pasture meter, which then I was able to put that behind the quad and drive it around the farm. It went from 2 days down to 1 day, but it's still at the busy time of year, calving, taking out 1 day to measure pasture. Often it unfortunately sort of still got put on the back burner at times, and you just sort of went by gut feel and iometer. And now we use the pastures from space from LIC. So that's a satellite map of the farm. And basically now all I got to do is click and I get a sort of map. It's actually on the next slide I'll show you. And so what that enables me to do is save a quick bit of time, still go out and occasionally sort of ground truth some of the numbers and make sure they're accurate, but it makes so less time spent collecting the information, more time analyzing the information is sort of how we move now. In terms of how we graze, I sort of follow a number of the principles from a program that was run here in New Zealand called the Pasture Plus. And so it sort of talks about the three leaf principle. So ryegrass, and that's our predominant base of our pasture is ryegrass, and it might be a tetraploid or a diploid, and usually we'll add in a couple of clovers, a couple of white clovers, and a red clover as well. Red clover is sort of, at times it can be the only thing that is growing in the paddocks at this time of year in February. For most of the year you don't even notice it, but come February, March, in certain paddocks it seems to do quite well and actually provide some feed there. And so we'll look at, so ryegrass is the sort of base of the things, our pasture. And so we're looking at the plant leaf, how many leaves are up. So our ideal at this time of year would be to graze a paddock when there's 3 leaves up, and keeping a track of that what we call the interleaf interval. So how many days after grazing is that before that new second leaf just emerges, and that is sort of roughly how we try and aim for what's a good round speed. So like right now, I'm guessing last time we did this exercise a couple of weeks ago, and it was 10 days. 10 or 9 days was the interleaf interval. And so we're looking at, well, ideally we want to be grazing, particularly at this time of year, at 3 leaves. So if it's a 10-day interleaf interval, we want our round to be out to about 30 days. In spring, we might be really pumping along at an 8-day interleaf interval. But then we will sort of, the fact that it's growing so fast and we want to maintain quality, we'll possibly look at aiming to graze at 2.5 leaves, just so it doesn't get away from us, because often maintaining that quality in the spring is a key determinant for us in terms of getting milk in the vat, because if that you don't graze down well enough, then the next round it's pretty poor. The quality just drops and drops and drops. And or if you don't top it afterwards, that can come back and bite you. And so that's sort of part of it. We obviously looking at the kgs of how much dry matter there is in the paddock as a way of determining the area, cows. So we're just constantly always sort of trying to balance up all of those numbers with what our eyes are telling us about the pastures in terms of, you know, what's a smart round length, what's the right area to be giving them, do we need to be giving supplements? So, you know, to take that round speed slower at the moment, now we're putting silage back into the system. In terms of back in the spring, obviously our sort of control mechanism there is, you know, if we want to get that round length, round speed down, we'll be taking paddocks out of the rotation and turning them into silage, just to maintain that quality and to balance up everything. So we're kind of, you know, those are sort of the principles we use just to try and balance everything up and keep it all moving in a smart manner. I'd love to say there's some smart program, and lots of paper and stuff that goes in behind this, but often it just occurs in my head, and just sort of make it happen. I do have a little Excel spreadsheet that we use, that the staff can use, just in terms of, you know, being able to put in some of the variable numbers to tell us, you know, what size the paddock should be, or how much supplement they should be getting. It's just a easy way for staff to help understand those basics. I can move to the next slide. It doesn't seem to be working here. There we go. So this is the satellites, LIC space it's called. So as you can see, this is my farm here that's obviously in the bright colors, and so really it's that sort of visual contrast that you can see helps me identify, you know, where I've got pasture, where I don't have pasture, and, you know, right, I've got to go to those places next, graze them next. It's a very simple, easy to understand way of being able to correctly go to the right place. Is it 100% accurate? Well, if you look at the first 6 paddocks here, and so it's saying they are, you know, from 3,200 to 28 kg of dry matter. They're actually maize paddocks. So no, it doesn't register, and those maize plants would be about 6 foot tall. Well, some of them higher actually, because they're over my head and I'm 6 foot. So when it gets to the extremes, no, it doesn't measure it very well. So like this is maize here, this is maize here, and this is maize here. You can obviously see the little patch where I got far too much rain in the spring when it was sown, and it's sort of would have been better off planting rice there, quite frankly, than maize. And in here, it's not as high. It's a sort of sandy patch of the paddock, so it hasn't taken very well there. So obviously the satellite is sort of, I guess, focused towards pasture, and it measures it well. If we look at the next top pasture one, which is 42 there, this is this paddock here, that is actually about right. So, you know, when I looked at that with my eye, yep, that's correct. Looking at the next one, yeah, these were about right. And so that's sort of how I use it. We sort of ground truth some of those top paddocks and go, well, actually, is it? So we'd go through to, you know, W42 here, which is down here, quickly zip down the road, have a look at it and go, yep, is that right? Sometimes the year it seems to be a little bit over, a little bit under, and we'll just sort of go, all right, well, that's probably calling 100 over or 100 under, and so I'll just, you know, alter that for the rest of the paddocks. But the key thing here is the order is correct. So I know actually, you know, the cows need to go here and then here in their day paddocks. And then, well, you can see in their night paddocks, they're already done this bit and I'm moving through here. But that's the, you know, you're able to look at the order and go, right, well, this is the order they do them in, and then you just go and ground truth the number as to whether you need supplements or not. So that's sort of the newest way of doing the pasture that I'm using at the moment. Next slide. Probably the challenges in our system really is walking distances, and you couldn't see it from that map, but we're very much we're terraced, so yeah, our paddocks are, everything's flat, and then it's not flat, it's sort of a vertical drop from one terrace to another. So there's about 100-foot difference actually from our cow shed to the paddocks directly below it, which are down by the river. And so that those hill climbs can, you know, they take all of this stuff, you know, walking the furthest distance to the cow shed's about 2k. That the highest climb they'd have to do is about 100 feet vertical. Well, they don't go vertically, the track obviously goes at an angle, but it's using energy. So there's energy lost, or, you know, feed they eat to provide them with the energy to do that. That doesn't go into production. So that's sort of one of the things that, you know, does provide a bit of a challenge. Obviously, it's weird, I picked the photo of the least challenging walk the cows have got to do for that slide. So that's one of the challenges. And staff, I should say quantity as well as quality, to be honest. This time we've had one staff member out with a broken knee from a car accident month and a bit back. Another guy hurt his finger the other day. So quantity is a challenge for me. That's why I'm milking in the morning. And quality at times. So people that can, when the cows come out of the paddock, look at that paddock and go, they've left a little bit too much here. Maybe we need to top this. Maybe the cows need to come back in here and clean it up. So, you know, when you've got good quality people, it makes the system work a lot better. And obviously when you've got lesser quality people, or you know, via injury or people leaving and not being able to replace them quick enough, not having enough people can, you know, create a bit of a quandary in terms of being able to do everything. And particularly in spring, you know, if you don't have enough people to keep up with the topper going behind the cows to maintain that quality, then it can come back and bite you. So that is one of the challenges. And shade and shelter, you know, whilst it's fairly temperate here, you know, we do have the odd days where it does go over 30, and you know, the cows won't be eating as much. They will be trying to hide under trees all day long, and so that can impact, you know, how much they're eating, how much they're putting into milk production. And likewise, in the middle of winter, there are some days where it'll just be, you know, we do occasionally get snow here, but more, it's probably the sort of wind chill, rain coming in, you know, that in those situations, they're always putting stuff into, you know, energy, maintaining themselves rather than milk production. So, you know, that, you know, if I won lotto and had heaps of money, I'd definitely be building a little barn by the cow shed, just to sort of help them out in those times. But at the moment, you know, this sort of doesn't really economically justify itself to do that for, you know, because we don't really have what you'd say is those challenges, which would definitely 100% pay for itself. It's probably getting close in terms of, you know, not wasting feed, but it is, you know, I've obviously got to buy my brother out first. So once he's bought out, then that might be the next thing I look at to help improve the system. Next slide. So technology I use on the farm. So in the cow shed, we've got automatic cup removers. So we've got a 44 bale rotary cow shed, and basically you only need one person to milk. And so one person milking, one person getting the cows in, and then they can do either start hosing the yards, or keeping the walls clean, trimming cows' tails, or go off and get some other work done, and then come back an hour or so into milking to help clean up. And so that is it's when we put that system in back in 2008 when we bought the other side of the road and expanded the herd, because I knew I had to move to running 2 herds through I couldn't keep everyone in one herd. Had to go to 2 herds, and so it was going to be a situation where you'd need, in that situation, I'd need 3 people for, if I didn't have some automation, I'd need 3 people every single day for every milking. And so, when looking at the automation that could go in the cow shed, it just made sense that whilst I still need a minimum of 3 people on farm every day, at the moment with me being off trying to do federated farmers stuff, it enables people to do other things rather than just stand there and do milking. It gives everyone a break from cupping cows as well. So if you're cupping in the morning, you'll be bringing cows in the afternoon, sort of thing, and vice versa. So we've got the automatic cup removers, so they just simply take the cups off once the cow's finished, and so there's just one person putting the cups on. Milk metering, so that's measuring protein, fat, yield, and somatic cells, and that's sort of not in every single bale, but it's in every 4th bale for the somatic cells and every 2nd bale for the rest of the metering. And that means that basically every milking every day, you're at least getting information on their production, and every 2nd day information on the somatic cell. And in that photo there, you'll see sort of this is the display it cups on, and so they can see what the cow's doing. Like this pink column here, that's their reproductive stage. So this was taken back in spring. Well, no, sorry, just before Christmas. That's M means how many days ago they were mated. So it's telling me what these cows have done. Obviously, if there's cell count, brings up an alert saying high cell count cow. And so when that cow comes on, staff know to go and paddle her, check her for mastitis. And if she does have mastitis, then obviously we can enter the treatment in the computer and it brings up an alert, don't milk her. We've also, the automated wash system is actually pretty old now. Many of you will probably have it if you're dairy farmers, just the D-Level hygienist system, and auto drafting. So if that cow did have mastitis and we wanted to draft her out, at the keyboard it cups on, you could just press F3, which would be draft left, and off she goes, gets drafted into the vet yard, and automatic teat spray. Other things got at the cow shed, so Wi-Fi, which is very useful for have a couple little app checklists, and so staff can use those on their phone. And that's on the next slide I'll show you. Some of the other tech, water and electric fences. So we've got tank monitoring, flow meters, and our Energizer is internet capable. The company Gallagher, some of you may be familiar with, they haven't exactly, they've made it internet capable, but they haven't developed the app yet, so that I can look on my phone and see all this information. But once they've developed the app, then I'll be able to not only see that, but I'll also be able to see all the water information as well. And obviously the other technology is sort of most of the computing software we use is sort of all cloud based. Next slide. So yeah, that's the on the left there, that's the app. Just something the template one online that I found that I could create sort of my own, and that's sort of a setup checklist for the staff. And they just, when they're setting the cow shed up for milking, they just go through and tick each thing as they do it. It helps prevent mistakes, and it's a good training aid. Keeps people remembering what each step is and helps them get everything done faster. And this one here is an example of the sort of the tank meters. It's hopefully Gallagher. I've got these flow meters. They're just manual at the moment. They are developing a little thing that's going to clip onto them, which is then going to send the information back to this online hub that they're still to develop, which will make life, in summer, there's nothing worse than spending all day running around trying to find a water leak or a broken trough somewhere. So being able to see that the tank's, at 50% full, that lets me know I've got a problem. But then being able to check the flow meters to work out where on the farm that problem is also a hell of a time saver. So that's just sort of next slide. Some of the tech. What I'd like to see, more integrated programs is a big one for me. Particularly with, the UK is no different to New Zealand. Lots of assurance programs, lots of people wanting to know various bits of information, and it feels like you're filling in the same information for about half a dozen different people, and often it's half a dozen different government departments, and why the hell they can't share that information. Or particularly, one of the biggest frustrations I have with some of the accreditation programs is it's information. My dairy company, which is a co-op, Fonterra, they want to see. That's information that can often be held by another co-op that I own, maybe my fertilizer company or whatever. And it's like, why the hell these guys can't share information is beyond me. So if we can get more integrated programming, it's going to make farmers' lives a lot better, and stop wasting so much of our time having to fill in the same information multiple times. So ROVs, remote operated vehicles. So I would love to see, as I mentioned, some of the biggest challenges can be in terms of maintaining pasture quality in the spring. Is just sometimes if people are off sick or there's a whole bunch of things going wrong and we've all got to deal with those things, we don't have time to jump in the tractor and top a paddock. Whereas if I had like a remote controlled operated quad bike and I could put a little mower behind it and just set it off to go and top a paddock, well, it doesn't need a break for lunch or anything like that. It can just go 24/7. And so I think, to me, that would be the next game changer in terms of making life a bit easier on the farm. Some of those really mundane tasks where effectively all you're doing is driving in an ever decreasing circle on a farm. How can we sort of remove the human from that element? If we can control a little rover on Mars, surely we can control a similar rover on my paddock. And I think more apps for better HR, lean management. Those are things that would make life a lot easier. Certainly, we've got one of the cloud computing I use is payroll software, PaySource, and it's made life a hell of a lot easier. With that platform, there is probably more they could do on that to even make it, not just controlling the payments and the contracts for the staff, but task manager, giving them farm policies and that, so that you know, the younger people I have on my farm, you know, they live on their phones. So if I'm able to put a bunch of information on their phones, it's going to make my life a lot better. And next slide. What are final point, then barriers, data standards. It's something I've been involved in here in New Zealand, working on it. And one of my other roles is I'm on the executive committee for Agri-Tech New Zealand. And it's one of the projects we're working on at the moment. So data standards is basically making sure all the computer programs speak the same language. So when, you know, in a program, so my herd management program, if we call a heifer, there's in another program, you know, the heifer means the same thing. You know, this is the age which is called a heifer, and this is the age which is called a calf. Just simple little things like that, so that when you're recording something in one platform, it means the same in another platform. And if it does, then you're able to swap that data in between the programs like I was talking about before. If they don't match up, that's when it makes it really hard to share that data. Connectivity would be another big challenge. At Federated Farmers, we do a survey every year on connectivity, and you know, our latest one showed a quarter of New Zealand farmers less than 5 megabits a second. So really, I'm one of the lucky farmers that can, you know, a quarter of New Zealand farmers couldn't do what I'm doing right now and be on a video conference with people around the world, because they probably don't have the speed. They might do it at midnight, they probably might do, but in the middle of the day, possibly not. So for those of you that my age and can remember what beta and VHS actually mean, I think one of the fears of uptaking tech is, what if I buy the wrong stuff? You know, if I buy beta or high digital, or whatever the hell that flash DVD one was, I can't remember what it stood for. But if you buy that platform instead of the one that ended up becoming the standard, you know, have you suddenly wasted a whole bunch of money on the wrong thing? And so you'll have, you know, people holding back, going, well, I'll just want to double check, you know, that this is actually going to be the right thing. You know, I mean, for our cowshed automation system, you know, I was reasonably an early adopter of it, but in time, you know, that company has been bought out by another company. I don't have integration with our national animal identification recording system. So there's, you know, if I was to make the decision right now as to which sort of automation system I would go with, it wouldn't have been that crowd based on where it's ended up, but on where I am. And so that's sort of you know, people are reluctant to sometimes invest in tech because they might invest in the wrong thing and something else might come along. And you know, for me, I just think technology, certainly for my farm, embracing tech with all the other things I'm trying to do actually means I'm able to multitask and get stuff done. Honestly, I don't know, you know, if I went back in time 20, 30 years and I was the, you know, president of Federated Farmers 30 years ago, and I'm, you know, I was playing the role I am I wouldn't be able to play the role I do in my farm, you know, with the technology that was available 30 years ago and do the presidency of Federated Farmers. It just would have been impossible. So technology, being able to do, you know, media interviews from my cowshed, and, you know, making calls and solving problem, you know, being able to talk to staff through how to fix a pump via text message while I'm in the middle of a board meeting, you know, those sort of things, you know, that it enables me to be able to do all the roles I do. Without technology, I'd only be a farmer, or I'd only be a Federated Farmers president. Look, I think I've rabbited on enough. So that's me. Thank you.
That's great, Andrew. Thank you for that. We're going to have a more general question and answer session at the end, but just a couple of technical points for clarification, I suppose, as much as anything before we hand on to our next speaker. A question around space and LIC's satellite measuring. Is that so? How often is that data updated? Is that weekly? I mean,
yeah, they've moved to. So originally it was only when you'd get a map when there was no clouds. So the satellites above, I don't know, several times a day apparently. It goes past and takes photos. But, you know, if there's clouds, it can't give a very good reading. And obviously the Maori name for New Zealand is Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud. So it can be quite challenging at times. You know, particularly, I think there was a, you know, rather overcast spring where I got very little information through. They have just recently upgraded to using estimated pastures. So they've whatever the last photo is, then integrating that with some modeled numbers on expected growth rates and extrapolated that forward. That's nowhere near as accurate as when they've got clear skies and get the actual photo. But, you know, ideally, the actual ones sort of coming through every, you know, in good weather every week, and not so great every 2 weeks, and then you might get an estimated one in between them.
Okay. Yeah, you think you've got a problem with cloud? You should try the UK, because that's maybe why we don't have access to that technology yet. And another question there, just finally before we move on, around topping. You mentioned topping decisions, and do you have a preferred means of topping, so rotary or a disc type mower, and also
disc type mowers what we use.
And do you do
it's pretty standard for most everyone in New Zealand. I'm not even sure what a rotary is. That's yeah, disc mowers are sort of what we all use, but they're obviously not the same mower we'd use for mowing silage. We've got a separate one that just sits a little higher. The ideal is not to, you know, we want to graze in down to about 1500 is our target. So I don't want to go in and top much lower than that.
Okay. And is that always post grazing? Do you do any pre-grazing?
It's actually been a bit of a debate for many years in New Zealand as to is it post or pre. So my farm consultant had me doing it pre-grazing for a while, and then there was some research done that actually showed very little that post-grazing might have had the edge there, based on the fact that if you're doing pre, then often the cows will be eating some lesser quality stuff as well, and it can affect production. Whereas if you just do the post, then straight after the cows are out, they'll have gone and eaten all the good stuff, and then you get rid of the bad stuff.
Great. Look, we've got a heap of really good questions, but we'll hang on to those until the end of the session. Thanks for now, Andrew. So if you can stay awake, hopefully you'll still be there when we come back to you later on. But that's really good, really informative. That's excellent. We're going to move on now to Nigel Locke, our second speaker. Nigel's farming in Tsitsikamma, I think I pronounced that correctly, in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. Grazing, I think, 1,800 cows on 250 hectares of irrigated, predominantly ryegrass pasture, I think. And Nigel's going to talk about how he uses AFI milk, the dairy management system, which basically combines, from what I can see, multiple sources of data for the efficient and precision management of a large herd of dairy cows. So welcome, Nigel. It's really great to have you along. Really looking forward to what you've got to say. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me. So the theme of this talk is technology to manage dairy cows. So I'm going to concentrate on the cow aspect of it. Even though we are a pasture-based farm, I'm just wondering, can I get control of these slides?
I think you might have control, but there we go.
Okay. So we, as you said, we farm in the sort of southeastern part of the country, very close to the sea in the Tsitsikamma, which is on the garden route. It's a very narrow band of about 15 kilometers wide between the mountains and the sea, and about 80 kilometers long. And there's only two types of enterprise that take place here, and that's dairy farming or forestry. We have an annual rainfall of about 1,000 millimeters a year, and a very temperate climate with the odd hot day and the odd cold day. The southern part of our farm, which is this is a view that some cows see sometimes. Let's see, there's a marine park that borders us, which is the Tsitsikamma National Park. So over many years, this thing's been debated all over the place, but here are my 5 rules of dairy farming. First one is to manage and feed your cows individually. And there's, you know, we've tended to move from looking after cows individually into looking after cows in groups or managing herds of cows. And the thing is with cows, they're just like people. Now, my wife and I have 3 daughters, and I can tell you that there is no way that I can manage them as a herd. I have to manage them individually. And it's the same with cows. The difference between cows and women, of course, is that cows make you money. And they do have a resale value. So we have to manage our cows and milk them individually. And we focus a lot on the transition period. And we aim to calve at body condition score 3.25 on the standard European system. And this is also a kicker. Dry cows need to increase weight just to maintain body condition score. Most dairies in South Africa will weigh their cows. And guys will often say, I weighed the cow at dry off and she was 500 kilos. And a week before calving, she was still 500 kilos. So she must be okay. But 75% of fetal growth takes place in that last 6 weeks. So it's not okay. And the other thing is you have to manage your heifers so that you can AR them at roughly at 58% of the adult mass at about 14 months. And the way we calculate that out is there's an algorithm that takes care of that. It takes the 180-day weight of the animal and assumes in a healthy animal that is 35% of the adult weight. And then we extrapolate the data to 58%. So every heifer will have its own AR, basically ideal AR weight. Because the thing you've got to recognize is that because cows are individuals, they also vary greatly in size. I mean, the lightest cow in any herd will be half the weight of the heaviest cow. I've seen this all over the place. And so it is with heifers. There's natural difference in size, different metabolisms. And if we can look after those sort of things, we aim to get the marginal litre out of cows. So on our farm, we Holsteins, on our heifer target weight at 6 months is 180 kilos plus their birth weight. And we weigh all our calves at birth. So because traditionally we always thought that nutrition drives yield and fertility, but it doesn't, you know. It actually drives every single thing on your farm. This is a whole virtual cycle. If something goes wrong somewhere, it's going to have a knock-on effect somewhere else. For example, calves that are born weak or calves that die in the first 2 months of their life, very often you can go back and look at the cow and you'll see she had a traumatic event in the first third of her pregnancy. These things are all interconnected and you cannot drop the ball anywhere at any time. So this is a drone photo of our farm. Now, we farm on roughly the same size land as Andrew farms on. Our farm size is 330 hectares, but we farm on 230, which is arable, and it's under irrigation. We have 14 center pivots, which are all computer controlled. And we grow about 19 tons of grass, which we measure, because we know we grow that. And I am a very big believer in the best fertilizer is footsteps. So this farm gets walked by foot every single week. And I've been doing that for many, many years. And that way, it's not just a case of measuring pastures, it's a case of checking fences, roadways, all kinds of stuff. So we grow about 19 tons of grass a year. We take out a quarter of the farm for maize every year. You can see that block of maize silage over there. That's 56 hectares of maize silage there. Incidentally, that's the Atlantic Ocean over there, and about 2,000 kilometers further south is the South Pole. So we grow maize, and the harvest we generally get is about 22 tons of dry matter, which is about 65 to 70 tons wet. And we grow maize for more than just to increase the forage production of the farm. The two challenges that we face on intensive pasture farms, and it's a challenge all over the place. The first one is liver fluke, which is a big issue. And the second one is rising potassium levels in the soil. So the idea with the maize is we take out and we rotate this every year. It's a different quarter of the farm. We plant the maize, so we try and soak up a bunch of the potassium and some of the phosphates. And then also to have no animals on that land for about 7 months, which then breaks the cycle of the parasites. Now on our farm over here, this farm about 25 years ago, our carbon percentages in the soil were under 2%. And by going on a zero-till system and intensive ryegrass and intensive grazing, and bringing supplements onto farm, our carbon percentage now sits at over 6%. So we're sucking a lot of greenhouse gases out. And the idea is to try and use that and recycle it in the form of maize. So we do that. Now we run about 1,800 head of cattle. And so this year we're going to calve 1,200 cows. And it's roughly 600 in the autumn and 600 in the spring. So it's also a split calving season. But you can do the calculation that less than half the food that those cows consume come off the farm, even though we grow so much food, because there's a lot of animals. And there's a number of reasons for doing this. But anyway, that's our dairy down there. That's a 60-point rotary. And that's the feed pad at the back there. The cows get all their supplements are fed out in the feed pad post milking. And the supplements are altered every week according to the amount of grass that we got available. So right now, obviously, we don't have a lot of grass available because a quarter of the farm's under maize silage. So we are using quite a bit we got maize silage from last year still, and other supplements will be lucerne hay and apple pomace, which we have a contract with a local factory in a food grain area. So the dairy from the side, those big silos on the right-hand side are maize. We buy whole maize on the futures market, and we truck it down every week from the Johannesburg Free State area. There's a bulk unloading facility there, and it gets milled just in time, just before milking. And then we also, that silo over there is soya. We use soya. We produce a lot of soya in South Africa, but it's cheaper for us, much cheaper to buy it from Argentina, because it lands by ship just down the road over here. So we buy it through our local co-op. And yes, it is GM soya, just like the soya that you use in the UK, but don't know that it's GM. It is GM. And this side over here has mineral pellets in it. So the mineral pellets are all organic. We use a lot of organic minerals. And this year we tried something new to help with heat stress over summer, where we use Zinpro minerals, and they doubled the zinc levels in the supplement, and we added chromium to try and counteract leaky gut, which is a byproduct of heat. And it certainly seemed to have done quite a good job for us. So inside the parlor, up on the top left over there is a feed head where the feed gets allocated and fed out right over here. So there's 4 different bins up here. We use the one, like I said, is maize, the one is soya, one is minerals. The 4th bin is anionic salts, which we feed to our close-up or steam-up cows. Now, those concentrates are calculated every day on a number of parameters. And amongst others, it's body weight, it's body condition score, it's stage of lactation, lactation number, production, and importantly, butter fat and protein. And I'll show you now what we do, how we get that data and how we use it. So at the bottom of these bales over here, like underneath the 3 and so on, is the milk meter. And that is called that's the Affilab. That's an optical sensor. And we fitted the first ones must be about 15 years ago when we were a beta test farm for the Israelis. And we, the first version of them, they worked quite well, but there was quite an issue that was very cumbersome to calibrate them. You could only calibrate them with milk samples. Last year, the new software was launched, and we're working on version 5.4 now, which is highly integrated. And to calibrate our Affilabs is as quick as you can type the data in, that's how quickly they calibrate. And we take the calibration is done, I do it weekly, based on the results we get from our factory, from bulk tank results. And I can tell you that it is super accurate. And the reason I do it weekly is because on pasture farms, the cows are exposed to the weather, obviously, and the diet changes. Now, calibration on these optical instruments is obviously is done by fat globule size on the protein. And as you change the diet or the weather changes, so there are gradual changes in these globule sizes. So, which is why we calibrate weekly. And that is invaluable data for us. It's invaluable and it's really accurate. So we feed our cows based on the information that we get from our sensors, basically from, like I said, from the scale and from the milk meters and from the Affilabs. And what we've done is I built an algorithm into the system, which is called ECM, which is energy corrected milk. So all the cow's milk is corrected to a 4% fat and a 3.4% protein, which is the European ECM standard. And then the cows are fed accordingly. Now, if you look down at those 2 purple lines over there, those are 2 cows, roughly the same body weight, roughly the same stage of lactation. One is on 46 liters or kilos, and the other one is on 43 kilos. But the ECM is the reverse, because the cow that the bottom line on the purple line, her butter fat and protein, you can see her fat percentage is at 4.04, and where the top cow's fat percentage is 3.24. Now, it's pointless feeding those cows the same amount of concentrates every day, because you'd be overfeeding the one and underfeeding the other one. And you can see towards the right, feed allocation today is 11.3 kilos and 12.1. So the cow producing the lower amount of straight milk is actually getting more concentrates. And because we allocate the concentrates are allocated as a percentage of body weight according to ECM and as a percentage of body weight, BCS lactation number stages of lactation. So the cows are fed very accurately every single day. And the beauty of doing this is if a cow does go acidic, which does happen every now and then the first thing that happens is the fat falls. So as the fat falls, so the ECM falls. And so as the ECM falls, so the concentrates fall until she then reaches the stage of equilibrium and starts climbing again. And so it's a pretty nifty way of counteracting SARA or subacute rumen acidosis. And like, as I mentioned earlier, in any herd, anywhere, the smallest cow will be roughly half the size of the biggest cow. And I've actually seen on a farm in Brazil where there was a cow that was touching 1,000 kilos, and the lightest cow was 500 kilos. In New Zealand, you'll probably find cows on herds with cows of just over 300 kilos and cows of 600 kilos. So it is with butterfat as well. And now I just isolated the lowest fat readings on the farm and the highest fat readings on the farm of the cows at the moment. This is on the 25th of the 1st. You can see the lowest butterfat averages of these cows are like 2.85, 2.89, and yet the highest ones are 5.3 and 5.4 and 5.5. So you can't treat those cows the same. They need individual management. So this is our herd milk at the moment. It's about 8,800 kilos of milk. We peak at 34 kilos, and our daisy milk at peak is about 43. The top line over there is the body weight curve, and your target in any herd is that the post-calving body weight should be the same as the dry-off weight. Which is, then you know that that cow's been fed correctly, and she's probably going to dry off in a condition score of about 3.25, which we're looking for. So the results from doing this, and we've been on this now since the new software came out, probably September. I think it really took hold. So our ECM is up by 6%. And yeah, this is money. Our concentrate usage is down 11%. Now, on any dairy farm that feeds concentrates, anybody will know that that's your single biggest input cost, especially now that maize and soya prices have rocketed since the Chinese started buying large quantities. And what we find is our body weights are stable. And the reason our ECM is up, it's not the production on a liter basis is roughly the same. It's our solids basis moves up. So the other technological innovation which we've applied in the last couple of months is the AFIC collar, which is a collar around that cow's neck, which measures head movement, obviously to identify heat when the cow's in heat, and then also measures rumination and the chewing time of the cow. And that's also very, very valuable data. So you can see there the pastures are all ryegrass with a smattering of clover in it, which comes and goes. So there's another shot of these cows. These are first lactation cows, by the way. So AFIC collars, these purple peaks over here are heats that the collars showed out. So it is the head movement and in the old days we used pedometers which we had on their feet, which we used for also about 15 years, and they worked really well. But the collars are a step ahead because they're easy to apply. For starters, you don't lose them. And also it gives us so much more data. But it seems to me on pastures with cows walking very far distances, and our cows walk up to 6 kilometers a day, we miss less heats. We miss less heats than what we used to miss with the pedometers. But you can see those heats are clearly 21 days apart. She took on the second insemination and she's pregnant. So it shows her cows out very clearly. Now here's another cow, and she came up two heats, she's confirmed pregnant, and then she popped up as another small a light heat over here. We rechecked her, and she was confirmed pregnant again. But that was the cows had hoof trimming on that day. So her head movements she was hoof trimmed. So her head movements were obviously give us a false reading. So we've changed the parameters somewhat so that we get the strong heats coming through. So as an aside, what these collars did for us as well, in that 3 weeks ago, we had a event over here of facial eczema. Now, if you're not aware of facial eczema, if you've come from New Zealand, Australia, or South Africa, and you're a pasture farmer, you certainly know about facial eczema. It pops up every few years. It's a fungus that grows in the grass, and it excretes a toxin, which then attacks the cow's liver, and actually they start photosynthesizing. You can imagine the incredible pain that those cows are in. What we saw with our collars, we picked up 3 cows whose rumination rate had dropped off dramatically. So they were shown out to us. And at the same time, what I noticed was that their chewing rate, because chewing rate, when a cow's on heat, the chewing rate goes up, she nibbles all over the place. It also dropped. But the activity or the heat indicator had gone up. Looking at the 3 indicators, it was clear to me that those cows were very uncomfortable. So we pulled them out, and it was facial eczema. And the reason we had facial eczema is we had a very good spring. We had a very cold winter last year, very good spring, good spring rains, and we're now in the facial eczema season. But we, as a rule on pasture farms, we add zinc oxide, roughly about 12 grams per cow per day, into our ration. But we've been trying to reduce that because our zinc levels in our soils have climbed quite high. They're about 30 parts per million when they should be about 2 parts per million. So we reduced the zinc oxide, and the consequence, when we had an outbreak like this, and it wasn't just on this farm, it was all over the place and dramatic in places. We managed to find it very quickly, and we could immediately start adding zinc oxide into the supplement ration, and we stopped it. And the thing is with facial eczema, for every cow you see, there's 10 other cows that you don't see. One of the consequences of it is your somatic cell count shoots through the roof. So ours went from like 220,000 to 370,000 in the space of about 4 days. But it's come back nicely now. But now we've learned that we can, by using zinc oxide only during the summertime or late autumn time, we can maybe hopefully stop it from happening again. But the point is that we picked it up very quickly before there were any clinical signs on the cows. So the results of using the collars is that we're going to calve 10% more cows this spring, so which is a substantial increase on last year. And we've used 20% less seeders. We only use seeders on anustrous cows that don't show up on heat. But we've used 20% less seeders, which is quite an expense, and also you don't want to interfere with the cow. Intercalving period is 385 days, and we use 1.8 straws per pregnancy. And we used sex semen on our heifers as a rule for the first insemination. So these things work. And the very strong point about the system is that it's integrated. And so looking out on the northern side of the farm, the cows in pasture, and you can see the clovers amongst that ryegrass. And that's our boundary on the northern side, which is, as I said, is forest. It's either milking cows or forests around here or the sea. And I thank you very much for your time.
Nigel, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. An area of the world that I've never visited. So that was really, truly fascinating. Just before we move on, you talked around, obviously, concentrate feeding. And so what determines the amount of feed that you're actually allocating? You're allocating pasture. So what determines the rate at which you're feeding concentrates? And also, and you might have covered it, I might have missed it, how much on average are you feeding on a per cow basis?
Okay, so sorry, I should have added that in. Our average concentrate usage is about 300 grams per kilogram of milk produced. So you can work it out. It's 8,800 kilos times 0.3. The concentrates are allocated on the basis of our weekly farm walk. So we got the wedge, we know how much grass we got to know how many cows we got to feed. And then I do a ration balance. I do the ration balance myself. I'm still quite old-fashioned. We use the CPM program and it works for us. And we know what supplements we've got available. So we will obviously cost the supplements in terms of cost and energy and everything, and go for a optimized ration. And then CPM will tell us when energy becomes limiting and when protein becomes limiting. So cows might fall under what they're getting now, which is roughly 7 kilos of grass and 3 kilos of lucerne and 2 kilos of maize silage and about 2.5 kilos of apple pulp. We know that all the cows are allocated that. They've got that available, and then both we maybe get 20 liters of milk out the cow, theoretically. So of ECM corrected milk. So then we feed that into the feed menu, so that Affimilk knows it's got to start feeding from that amount. But then we also know CPM tells us when protein becomes limiting, which is roughly at about 26 kilos of milk. So the soya will only come in at that level. So we don't feed soya to all the cows. You know, I mean, it's only the cows that require it.
And a couple more just before we move on. Do you graze as one herd, or do you actually have sub herds, and do you actually monitor the relationship between fat and protein in terms of sort of monitoring cow health?
We run separate herds. I don't like animals more than 330, 340 cows in a herd. I hate it. So we run 3 milking herds. The first one will be the first lactation. Second herd will be the very high producers, and the third will be the late lactation cows. And the principle on this farm is every single cow on this farm will get a fresh cut of grass every single day. Milk cows twice a day, so we move a fence in front of them. If there are followers coming in, which often happens, like we've got a big steam up group at the moment, we will leave a fresh cut of grass for them as well. So that's on the basis. What was the second part of that question, Robert?
Monitoring the fat and protein.
Yeah. No, that's a big thing for us, eh? Yeah. That's a big thing. That fat protein ratios, we don't want that to go out. And what we've found is that since we gone on to feeding for ECM, I mean, last year in January our butter fat ran at 3.4, and we're running at 3.85 now. Since we've gone on to, so it's limiting the acidosis, as I said.
Certainly getting a tremendous yield of milk from a grazing, predominantly a grazing system. So we'll move on now, but we've definitely got more questions. And if delegates want to pop questions through, use the chat function, they'll come through. I want to introduce you. So thank you, Nigel. We'll come back to you later, but I'll introduce you now to our sponsors. So Germinal are our sponsors today, and we've got a joint presentation next from Ben Wixie and Helen Matthew at Germinal. I think Ben is going first. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just trying to share the screen. There, can you see that now?
Yeah, that looks good.
Brilliant. Right, good morning, everybody, and thank you to Dairy Tech Online for the opportunity to talk about the forage innovation in the breeding program that Germinal are doing. I hope most of you know who Germinal are, but in case you don't, we are a family-owned 7th generation business. We started trading in 1825, so we're coming up for 200 years now. We don't deal direct with farmers, but we do deal with all the merchants that the farmers deal with. So our grass and clovers that we breed are all prefixed with the ABBA word. So anything that you've used or you've heard about that's ABBA this or ABBA that has come from the breeding program that we're about to talk about. In 1980 or in 1980s, we formed a very strong partnership with Aberystwyth University, and that's where the breeding happens. It's been part of that relationship since it was Welsh Plant Breeding Station, then through IGA, and now through IBERS, the Institute of Biological, Environmental and Rural Sciences. and the name change tells you how the whole angle and perspectives has changed. And it's there at Aberystwyth University that we breed not only perennial ryegrass, hybrid ryegrass, white and red clover. And we do that using some of these innovative techniques that I'm going to talk to you about now. But we also set ourselves challenging situations of having other value-added benefits, which I'll come on to a bit later. So when we've bred a grass variety, we put it forward to trialing for the recommended list. And the recommended list is your way of understanding as farmers that the grasses that you're using work in our conditions. You've heard from dairy farmers from all around the world, and we get inundated from grass breeders from different parts of the world to say, you must use this, you must use that, it's brilliant grass. And we try it at our research farm, and it doesn't quite have the effects in this climate that we're told that it would. So the recommended list is your way of knowing that any grass variety you buy has been through that independent 4-year trialing program that's funded by AHDB and others. So it's a massively important security for you that what you're buying is the right grass for the farm in this environment. Okay, so once we've got a grass variety onto the recommended list, we want to know, Germinal wants to know how it performs in the winter, what its spring growth characteristics are, what its quality is like at first cut, what it's like in the middle of the summer. And we do that at the research station down in Melksham. And here we are testing for lots of different characteristics. That picture there is the native species trial. So that's work that Tom Frame did up in Scotland in the 1980s on the qualities or the lack of qualities from native grasses, your Yorkshire fog, your annual meadowgrass, your rough stalk meadowgrass, grasses that ingress into grass swards during the course of the year. So as you can see there, lots of different trialing going on, maize trials, brassica, we test kales, swedes, hybrid brassica, summer grazing, winter grazing, trials, all that sort of thing goes on there at our research station. So one of the innovations that we brought to the market, I hope, is you've heard about it, is high sugar grass. And if you look at the graphs on the left, the top graph is a typical graph of protein in blue and energy in green. And the difference there, you can see clearly there's far more protein that's available from the forage than the rumen can take up, because there's not enough energy in the rumen to utilize all of that protein. And we know one of the problems we face is that about 70% of the protein that's coming into the animal is going out of the animal. So what high sugar grass is trying to do is make better use of that protein. So a couple of ways we could have done it. We could have done a decreased protein content, so slow down the time that it takes for the availability of protein in the rumen. We've actually done this with red clover. Helen will talk about this in a minute, and PPO. Or what we actually did was increase the water-soluble carbohydrate level within the grass. So there you can see in the bottom graph, you've got a larger area under the green line where there's more energy provided to the rumen, more of that protein that's there is able to be absorbed by the microbes and or used by the microbes, and then we're having less protein wasted out the back of the animal and reduced methane and ammonia emissions as well.
I am, yeah.
This is all peer-reviewed science that's happened from Aberystwyth University and other universities around the country. And we've got yields, milk increased yields of about 6% from 100% Aber swards, and decreases in wasted nitrogen from high water-soluble carbohydrate grasses. So improvements there, both from production on the outside and to the environment. And we're working with these supermarkets on using some of these high sugar grasses with their producer groups, and it's not actually because of the production gains that the supermarkets are working with us. It's not because of the 6% more yolk or the daily dry matter intake or the live weight gain. It's the environmental credentials that they are interested in, the ammonia and the methane that's reduced from using 100% high sugar grasses in a sward. Okay. So I want to finish my short little bit on some of the other innovations that we're doing at the university. Lippy grass, I'm not convinced that it's actually going to be called lippy grass when it comes to the market, but lippy grass is the process of not changing the oil content of the grass, but changing the polyunsaturated fatty acid content. So by doing that, we can increase the live weight gain of the animal, we can increase the milk yield, and importantly, we can reduce the methane and ammonia that's coming out the back. We've also got lower saturated fatty acid content in meat and milk coming through. So that's a new product coming through the system, which is probably a year or two away from the market. And you know, that's where we are with that. Dressula is an interesting project that we've taken care of, and this is where we've started to use markers. So Dressula the disease, we find perennial ryegrass plants from around the world with good disease resistance to Dressula, and we bring them back to Aberystwyth, and then we can use genetic markers. We find the genetic marker on that variety that enables us to see where the Dressula resistance is. When we then breed that variety into our breeding program, we can tell very quickly if the progeny have that marker in them and whether they're going to have good resistance to Dressula or not. And this can significantly reduce the amount of time it takes to bring a variety to the market. So just to give you an idea in terms of timescales we're working on, if we started a breeding program today, to get a variety to the market would take about 19 years. By the time we have got it onto the recommended list and then multiplied up the seed stocks to be able to sell it, take about 19 years. With this marker interruption, we can bring it into the breeding program, the family of breeding of lines that we have, and we could reduce that by about half. So it's big innovation, big step forwards in terms of timing and costs. Shore Root project is something that we've worked on with Northweek down in Devon, and here we're looking at the growth of the grass plant below the ground as well as above the ground. So what we're looking at here is using fescues crossed with perennial ryegrasses to give certain traits that we're looking for. Now we have to be really careful when you're mixing fescues and perennials, and I state here there's no genetic modification going on here at all. This is just pure breeding, traditional breeding processes. Fescues have very poor yield. They have very poor quality. They have very poor response to nitrogen, whether that's organic or inorganic, and they are very slow to establish. So there are lots of traits that we don't want out of the fescues, but what they do have is a great stress tolerance. So they have good drought resistance, they have good waterlogging resistance, and they have good winter hardiness. And you know, we heard this morning already some massive differences between winter temperature and summer temperature, and the fescue side of that can help with that side of things. The last project that we're working on is a new all over genome selection. So that is looking at the genome of different grasses, the way they are identified in the genomics, and then also growing them agriculturally and then combining the two. It's sort of a calibration system of what the genes are telling us. And from that, we can change the breeding program more quickly if we are faced with a new challenge. If we know what the phenotype is, if we know what the grass plant is going to grow like, then we can change the breeding program to include those traits in it in a much quicker way than we've been done traditionally, which would be crossing the male and the female and then growing the progeny and seeing how long that takes, seeing what characteristics we can see in that going forward. So genomic selection is just about having a calibration with genetics so that we can see what the grass plant is going to look like actually before we even grow it. So that's enough for me. Helen, you're going to take over now on. Do
you want to change the slides?
Clover. There we go. There we go.
Thank you. Good Afternoon now, everybody. And yeah, so the legume breeding, it follows a very similar sort of methodology to the grass breeding, using novel approaches along with genome mapping to evaluate the particular marker that we're looking for and identify which of those markers are influencing the traits that we're trying to breed in. And as Ben said, that can effectively reduce the length of time significantly to bring a variety to the market. But the picture you can actually see there is what we call a space plant nursery. So those are ecotypes of red clovers that have been collected probably from all over the globe, and they're sown out there, and then it's purely an observation, and eventually we'll see traits. You can see that some plants are already died, they're no longer there, but some of them are exhibiting traits that we want to explore and work out what's influencing those traits that we might be able to use going forward with you know, in breeding into different varieties. So thanks, Ben. Next one. So the legume breeding, yeah, the breeding work focuses on two main legume groups over here. That's the white clover and the red clover, but they're also looking at some bird's foot trefoil as well. So hybridizing white clover, that's with Caucasian clover. And then nutrient use efficiency. In the case of legumes, it's phosphate use efficiency, that's PUE, and also seasonal growth. So particularly earlier season growth with white clover. And then the red clovers, we're looking to improve the persistency and the grazing tolerance. So those are two of the biggest reasons why people have stopped growing red clover. It wasn't sort of economically viable to keep a red clover mixture going for any longer than 2 years. It just wasn't producing enough in the 3rd year and 4th year and beyond. And then looking also at the overall feed quality, and also breeding for both high and low levels of a plant enzyme called PPO, polyphenol oxidase, which protects protein within red clover. And of course, we also need all the you know, the prerequisite agronomic traits for national list and recommended list testing that Ben was just talking about then. Next one, thanks, Ben. So most breeding programs, and indeed the recommended list system, concentrates on the above ground traits. And as Ben said, at Germinal with IBERs, we're breeding, looking at our breeding programs, we're looking at very much what's happening below ground. So rooting systems, the hybridizing Caucasian clover with our white clover, so our white clover, that's Trifolium repens and the Trifolium ambiguum. So the Caucasian clover is closely related to white clover, and the breeders can hybrid the two types. They will cross in the wild naturally, but they hybridize the two types of clover, and then that new variety is then back crossed to white clovers to make it stable, but it results in a white clover with some of the Caucasian clover traits. So the plant produces rhizomes as well as the traditional stolons that we're familiar with, and below ground you get that rhizomatous growth of horizontal stolons that you can see there. That means that the plant is far more resilient than the white clover is normally. It's much more tolerant of intensive grazing, and it's better able to resist pests, but also copes well with stress in terms of more extreme weather conditions that we've already, you know, referred to. So that's both cold weather and heat, or in fact drought. And that root biomass that you can see there, it also contributes to, you know, improving the soil structure. It's going to help with soil structure. Thanks, Ben. So enhancing nutrient use efficiency, that's nitrogen use efficiency or phosphate use efficiency. The reason it's important, because if we can influence nutrient use efficiency and get the same production with using less nitrogen, there's obvious benefits there, or continue to greater production when we're talking in a low P soil. So there's a potential there, apart from using less nutrients. The potential is to greatly improve water quality whilst maintaining or actually improving plant performance. So most phosphorus fertilizers comes from sort of phosphate rock, so it's seen as a very finite resource. Now, I do realise we're talking to dairymen today, and you know, low P soils and low phosphorus soils probably aren't very much an issue in dairy systems, And indeed, there are obviously there are places in Europe where we've got phosphate vulnerable zones, but it's still seen potentially in the future as being, you know, a limiting factor. And phosphate is also very much important for legume establishment. So legumes, clovers are particularly dependent. They have a very high demand for P. In the image there on the left, those are half pipes that we keep in the phenomics center, and you can see different lines of white clover there that have been selected, and there's different levels of P in those soil. So it's one of the traits that they're screening for and looking for the molecular markers within those different lines that indicate greater phosphate use efficiency, or the ability to cope in a low P soil. So that's one of the you know, elements that we're looking at, the trait that would be, and how we can influence it. Thanks, Ben. So improving the persistency and grazing tolerance of red clovers. So you can see the image again there on the left, where in the space plant nursery, and some of these red clovers have got stolons. So this has got the potential to greatly improve the grazing tolerance and persistency of red clover. It has very similar growth characteristics to white clover, but it is much higher yielding, of course, than white clover. They seem also to have high PPO, this polyphenol oxidase, protecting the both protein and lipids in the rumen, but also the PPO, it has the ability to prevent protein breakdown in silage making as well. So it's quite an important constituent for red clover for ruminants. And also, obviously, if we've got stoloniferous red clover, it's going to cope a lot better with grazing, be much more grazing tolerant. Thanks, Ben. So farmers can benefit, therefore, from, you know, more robust and longer lasting red clover plants, and we have greater disease and pest resistance, which is what generally tended to you know, cause white clover to die after 3 years. So if we can breed the red clover varieties to last longer than that, we're going to be able to, they'll be much more useful in the rotation, while enabling the red clover ladies to yield well into that 4th and 5th year. So the breeding objectives were focused very much on crown survival. So the crown of the plant is very susceptible to damage. Once it's damaged, that damage allows the pest and disease to enter the plant. So that's stem nematode and sclerotinia and so on. If we can improve the structure of the crown and make it more resilient to that damage, then it's going to suffer less from machinery and animals grazing, and it will improve you know, the persistency and the grazing tolerance of the variety. There are 2 varieties currently available, Aber Claret and Aber Chianti are the 2 4-5-year red clovers on the market. So protein extraction, well, red clover, as we know, is very high quality protein with very good amino acid profile, compares well with things like soya. So it has far higher protein yield than things like peas and beans, and it can be grown successfully, certainly throughout the UK, but other areas of the world as well, obviously. So it's used extensively, as you already sort of said, to feed ruminants, but the protein can be extracted from the plant to feed monogastrics. So while we're talking about high PPO being good to protect the protein through the ruminant digestive system and in silage, if we want to extract that protein and use it in other areas, then we need low PPO varieties. So they're also breeding for low PPO varieties, hoping in the future that we'll be able to grow more red clover in arable rotations, where systems are set up to extract that protein to be used to feed, yeah, well, pigs and poultry possibly. Also, the red clovers, they're high in phytoestrogens, plant hormones, and they have possible uses in all sorts of human therapies and medical applications. So it's another co-product that could be extracted from red clover for use in different applications to livestock. So potentially going forward, that's you know, some quite interesting work that could lead to some quite innovative products there. So just a quick conclusion, really. So there are many challenges facing the dairy sector, but all the ruminant sector around the pasture-based systems. to maintain and utilize a good quality sward, but also at the same time we've got this pressure on carbon footprint and coping with the vagaries that climate is throwing at us at the moment, and surviving, whether it's harsh winters or retaining productivity when we have these long periods of drought. So our breeders at Germinal through IBERS, hopefully they're ahead of us. They have been so far in the innovations that they've brought to the market. They're working on traits that perhaps we're not even thinking about, both in grasses and in legumes, and combining some of the more traditional elements of plant breeding that we've seen there, but also it's backed by the modern technology to evaluate and develop traits that are going to be important not only now but in the future. So looking to influence by breeding these forages greatly, sort of an influence sort of globally on sustainable agriculture. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Helen. That was really informative. Just, there's a question coming around gene editing and whether you're using that, or if not, why not? And would it be something you would use?
Benny, you're going to take that one?
Yeah, hang on. In terms of gene editing, no is the answer. We're not using it at the moment. No. It's something that you should have the scientists here to answer the question properly, but it's not something that I'm aware of at the moment. No.
Okay. We've got a heap of questions, and I'm conscious that we've sort of gone over time, so we'll maybe have 10 minutes or so of questions around soil carbon and sward diversity. I mean, I'm going to invite our other speakers back in on this one. I just want to check that Andrew's still with us. But Nigel talked about soil carbon. Andrew, you didn't mention soil carbon, I don't think, in your presentation. So thinking about, you know, the type of swards you're growing, are you looking at soil carbon? Are you looking at diversity? I mean, what are you doing in New Zealand in terms of building soil carbon? Is it something you're measuring, or what?
It's an interesting topic that we've been talking a lot about in New Zealand recently. One of the key things is our soil carbon, because we're geologically a younger country than most others, our soil carbon hasn't dropped like places that have cropped for many, many decades or years, hundreds of years. So we're naturally high. Our scientists believe we're sort of in balance, as it were. There's lots of people talking about building their soil carbon, and that should be used for offsets. It's something where, if you may have heard, we've got a partnership in New Zealand between farming organisations and the government, primary sector climate change commitment. And one of the work streams is around sequestration and looking at the soil carbon question. Some of our scientists have been a little hesitant on pushing that angle too much, because their understanding is, whilst, you know, we're kind of in balance, there are some farms that are dropping soil carbon, some are gaining, but it can also be an annual thing. You know, if you get a couple of years of drought in a row, your soil carbon levels drop. And so there's the risk of trying to measure this or measuring it, and then there's factors outside of the farmer's control which can influence it. And those guys may end up then, you know, if we're going to have a price on carbon, they could end up paying a price on the fact that they've been in drought, and they're going to be short on money anyway from the drought. So it's something we're looking at, but it is a situation that's slightly fraught. And I guess my big concern, you know, we've seen lots of talk around this all around the world. My big concern is you hear about places where they're talking about how they've built their soil carbon up by X amount, and actually, yeah, it's really easy to build something up when you deplete it right down. Should people get credit for actually building back to where it possibly could have been if they had livestock in the picture in a mix all along?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's something, and we talk a lot about, actually it's very current at the moment, but what about diversity? I mean, you go through a dry period, you say you're struggling this time of year to grow grass.
Yeah.
For probably March time. Are you wedded to rye grass and clover, or are you thinking
I've tried other plants. So I've tried tall fescues, fine leaf cocksfoots, certainly plantain, chicory. They're part of the mix often now, unless you're trying to deal with Californian thistles. You know, I've put that in paddocks where I know I don't have a weed problem, because, you know, if I try and kill the weeds, I end up killing the plantain and the chicory at the same time. So there are those things. Yeah, the buzzword of the moment's regenerative farming, and yeah, there's all this talk of having lots and lots of things in your pasture. To be honest, the scientists I've talked to say go back in 2 or 3 years' time, and you're probably only going to have a handful of things there anyway. To be brutally frank, I think for some people it's just more of a buzz and yeah, hobby. Yeah, I'm not a huge regenerative fan. I just think it's just plain old farming, quite frankly.
Okay, that's very honest. Nigel, similar question to you, and just clarify the carbon. You mentioned you've gone from 2% to 6%. I mean, is that soil organic carbon? Is that organic matter? What is that measurement? And how long did it take, actually? I can't remember what you said. I think you mentioned how many years it took. I think you're on mute. That's it.
Unlike New Zealand, we work with the oldest soils in the world and the most weathered soils in the world. So the natural vegetation around here, which is fynbos macchia, the carbon percentage is below 1%, and I'm not sure how that's measured on soil samples. But the and your phosphates would sit at about 8 parts per million, and your potash would sit at about 30, 40 parts per million. So the advantage this area had, and that's why we started farming here, was, and it was only in the 1950s that farming really took off over here, is because of nitrogenous fertilizer and phosphate dips. But what we've built up the soils over years and years. Now, everybody used to aim for a 2% carbon in their soils. And by farming the way we do, and we just have ryegrass and we plant a bit of chicory in it. And by bringing maize in as a factor as well, I think we're doing pretty well, and we certainly getting the yields. And incidentally, that maize that we're growing there, we're not applying anything, we only apply nitrogen. Because our soil phosphates are sitting at about 50 parts per million now. And our challenge, as I said, is potash, which we're sitting at 280 to 300, which is pretty high. So, and that creates all kinds of issues with cows when they eat that, close-up cows when they're eating that with milk fever and stuff like that. So, so that's one of the reasons why we plant the maize. But I must say that this multi-species wave crossed this part of the world as well. Like, I mean, consultants were screaming about it, and everybody went crazy because this is sustainability. It's marketed under the word of long-term sustainability. That was about 3 years ago. Most of those pastures, as Andrew just said, have just reverted back to type. And I mean, the guys were planting lucerne and clovers and plantains and everything in it. Get a drought, what happens? Your ryegrass dries off first because your chicory's got the deepest root system, your lucerne's got the deepest root system. Then you have to graze it quite often, so lucerne can't handle short-term grazing, short cycle grazing, so that disappears. So eventually you sit with just a bit of chicory in your land. So guys have gone back. And for soil health, my point is always, if we weren't farming sustainably and our soils weren't healthy, we wouldn't be able to grow the grass we're growing, and we wouldn't be able to grow the maize we're growing. So I reckon we're pretty, Andrew's hit the nail on the head over there. So it's a gimmick.
That's really interesting. I'm apologizing because my printer's decided to kick off behind me. I've got one of them unmanageable 3 daughters here. I think that you have a problem with, Nigel. Helen and Ben, have you got anything to add to that? Because, you know, is there a question mark over these diverse swards and their suitability for grazing rather than maybe silaging?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear those comments. Regen agriculture is obviously very popular here, and where we sit on it, it's more of the right mixture for the right situation. I think what you guys are doing there in around that grazing of dairy fields, then we wouldn't be advocating a mixed sward either. But in terms of in other areas where you have got low organic matters, or you have got young stock that you're breeding on, then bringing that diverse range with some extra growth at certain times of the year is a good way of doing it. We're more of the opinion that a herbal lay, a multi-species lay, in a dairy situation would be red and white clover perhaps, and a bit of plantain. That's probably as far as we'd go in a dairy situation, because, and even then we wouldn't expect the plantain to be there after a few years. But it does give you that variability to use that sward for young stock and bringing them on for a quicker live weight gain.
There's a question there from Tim Downs around the SureRoot project. Are you measuring carbon sequestration in that project or not? No,
that's not at the moment. That project with Northweek down in Devon was all about water flow. That particular element of it down there, and trying to stop or reduce the time from a rain event on the paddock. They're all hydrologically drained fields, and we were trying to see if the root structure of these plants could hold up the movement of water through the soil and into the streams, and thereby you could plant them on areas of catchment and slow that movement down the valley.
Okay, so I want to go back to a question that came in early on about research and development, actually, and get our international speakers' view on this, really. As the UK moves on post-Brexit, really, as to how we fund it in this country, it'd be interesting to hear, certainly from a New Zealand perspective, what proportion of research and development is government funded, and how much the industry or the private sector has to sort of stump up for this. Where's the sort of split, and also be similar in South Africa? Andrew?
It varies depending on the research. So we've got in New Zealand what we call Crown Research Institutes. So there's a couple that focus in agriculture, ag research, and land care, and it's hard to know actually what the national split is. Often they collaborate at times with MPI, the Ministry for Primary Industries, and also our levy bodies. So I know Dairy NZ, which I give quite a lot of money to through my milk levy. It's probably, a good 10 to 20 million, probably about 20 million of farmers' money goes into what you'd think research, and often it's the government will match. It used to be 1-for-1. I think they've dropped that ratio a little while back, so it might be for every $2 industry funds, government chucks in $1. Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know an exact amount that is totally spent on research. I do know, so we had our first Climate Change Commission report, or carbon budget, came out last week, and one of their recommendations was that actually there needed to be more investment in research and development, agricultural research and development in New Zealand. We need to do a lot more of it. In particular, soil science, we just have not been focused, there hasn't been the research going on there. And so much of, it's all based around the soils, like Nigel was saying. And, as a country, we should be doing a hell of a lot more on it. And we've got so many people with, out in the public with some very daft ideas around what we can and can't do on farm. And yeah, we need that strong science to actually back up what it is we as farmers are doing.
No, absolutely agree. We are, it feels like, under attack, and we need really good, robust data there to make our case and tell the story, really. Nigel, what is the situation in South Africa? How is it funded?
Things have changed quite dramatically in South Africa in the last 30 years, as you're aware. The focus has moved completely from where there was quite a bit of research on commercial agriculture. There's now a lot of it that is done is based on subsistence. So you have this dichotomy. You've got a very professional, well-educated commercial farming sector, and then we have the what they call a smallholder sector as well. So in terms of funding for research, we also have a statutory scheme where we a portion of our milk check is deducted every month, and that goes to a central organization, which I was a director of, not anymore, which is a statutory funded organization, Milk South Africa, and they then delay out the money according to various criteria, and part of it is for statistics and part of it for consumer education. And a large part, I think it's 40% of the money that comes in, goes for a function called transformation, which is otherwise known as which I'm a member of the transformation committee, which is to try and assist black farmers to become commercial farmers. And our feeling over there, I mean, we've had some real success sort of stories, and it's is to take a guy that's milking a couple of cows and help him milk a few more cows, and to go from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 cows. And we've been successful with some, because you can't take a guy and make him a farmer. You've got to find a farmer and make him a better farmer. But in terms of research, which I'm also a member of the research committee, is that we have to fund it ourselves. And the criteria for that is it has to be an industry-driven research project. So, because too often with research, you've got professors and guys who are after their own little pet stuff and following their own little path. So what we do is we identify problems within our sector, and then we put money into that. One of them is this thing we're doing now with using organic zinc in summer, doubling it up to try and prevent leaky gut and stuff like that. So there's not a lot of money, but at least we're using it very wisely now.
I don't know whether our sponsors have got anything that you want to add to that, Ben?
Just obviously with Brexit, we're not really sure where we're going with some of the funding in industry, because obviously a lot of it came from Europe. What the government seems to have said is that they will match that level for the next 4 or 5 years, but you have to have an industry partner. So you can't just do the research as a university or a research department. You have to have an industry partner to do the knowledge exchange and to find a project that is going to be of benefit in the first place to the farming community. There's no point doing the research just for the research case. So we'll wait and see. At the moment, it's BBSRC. There's still funds available for the right research projects.
Okay, thank you. Look, I think time is going to beat us here. We've probably gone about 30 minutes or so over where I expected to finish up, and very conscious that one of our speakers is in the early hours of the morning down there in New Zealand. So I'll draw this to a close now, and just express my huge appreciation to all 4 of you for your contribution to this session, especially Andrew there. It's 1:30 now in New Zealand. I know you've got to get up to milk cows shortly, but I think it's been a tremendous session, actually, really, really fascinating to listen to. And I think the participant number that we've carried through this session would back that up, really. A really, really informative session. Effectively, 2 farmers doing very similar things, but an awful long way from the UK. And it's great to see your challenges and how you're overcoming them, and hopefully there's some learnings for the UK. Thank you to Helen and Ben and Germinal for sponsoring this session. I think it's been really good. It's a really good one. It's one of these that could have gone on for hours, I'm sure, but you know, we've got to draw a line under it. But thank you to you all, and thank you to the delegates for tuning in as well. The next session is tomorrow, I think 10:30, the Innovation Hub, Innovation Conference for tomorrow for Dairy Tech Online. And so I think that's it from today. I'll let Andrew go to bed and say goodbye, and thank you to you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.